13 celebrities with the most horrifying secret lives. Behind the glittering lights and flawless smiles of Hollywood lies a dark underworld most fans will never see. Beneath the designer gowns, red carpet poses, and million-dollar smiles are secrets so disturbing they shatter the illusion of fame itself. While publicists spin perfect fairy tales and studios polish reputations to a blinding shine, the truth tells a much darker story. Today, we're pulling back the velvet curtain to expose the shocking private lives of stars whose charm, talent, and charisma hid terrifying realities. From Golden Age legends who lived double lives to modern icons quietly despised by those closest to them, these revelations will forever change the way you see these famous faces. What makes their stories truly chilling isn't just what they did, but how skillfully they fooled the world. Behind closed doors were lies, manipulation, and cover-ups so elaborate they could rival a Hollywood script. The silence of insiders, the industry's protection, and the calculated deception kept their darkness hidden for decades. So brace yourself, because what you're about to hear will make you question everything you thought you knew about fame, fortune, and the people we once adored. Let's start with America's beloved Christmas crooner, a man whose angelic voice hit a home filled with fear, control, and abuse. Charlie Chaplin. Charlie Chaplin, the man who made the world laugh, yet lived a private life that would horrify modern audiences. On screen, his little tramp was a symbol of innocence, a bumbling dreamer with a kind heart and a pure soul. But behind the camera, Chaplin's behavior revealed a much darker truth, a genius who preyed on teenage girls. Film historian Edward Marshall, who studied Chaplin's private papers, once said Chaplin had a type, and that type was girls barely out of childhood. At 29, he married 16-year-old Mildred Harris. His next wife, Lita Gray, was only 15 when their relationship began, and 16 when they married after she became pregnant. For a man hailed as the king of silent comedy, his private life was filled with cries no one heard. Chaplin's fame gave him access to starry-eyed young women desperate for a chance in Hollywood. He held all the power, the roles, the fame, the promise of success, and he used it to exploit the vulnerable. During his divorce from Gray, court records revealed shocking details, degrading sexual demands, threats to destroy her career, and secret studio payoffs to bury the scandal. They saw his conduct as part of the cost of keeping a genius happy, a film archivist later admitted, referring to the studio executives who protected him. His affair with aspiring actress Joan Barry pushed things even further. A public paternity scandal followed, and though blood tests showed Chaplin wasn't the father, the court still ordered him to pay child support. His reputation was shattered. The world that once adored him now began to see the cracks in the mask. Today, Charlie Chaplin remains a cinematic legend, but the truth behind his smile is far from innocent. The man who played a childlike tramp was, in reality, a predator who used charm and power to control those too young to resist. His art changed film forever. His actions, however, leave a stain that time can never erase. Marlon Brando. Marlon Brando's family life was less a Hollywood dream and more a real-life horror movie. He forever changed the art of acting with raw, soul-bearing performances in A Streetcar Named Desire and The Godfather, creating characters that define masculinity, power, and pain. Yet behind the brilliance and the Oscars, Brando's private world was collapsing. A Greek tragedy played out across generations, marked by absence, turmoil, and unbearable loss. Brando's idea of fatherhood was to disappear, physically or emotionally, recalled one family associate. The actor had at least 11 children with multiple women, but few ever truly knew him. He drifted in and out of their lives like a restless ghost, leaving behind wealth without guidance, love without structure, and fame without peace. In that void, tragedy took root. His eldest son, Christian Brando, grew up surrounded by privilege but no discipline. His life spiraled into violence and addiction, culminating in a nightmare that would scar the family forever. In 1990, Christian shot and killed Dag Drolet, the boyfriend of his half-sister Cheyenne, inside the family's Mulholland Drive mansion. The killing, reportedly sparked by claims that Drolet had been abusing Cheyenne, led to Christian's conviction for manslaughter and a 10-year prison sentence. The emotional wreckage only deepened. Cheyenne, already fragile and battling mental illness, was shattered by the loss. Unable to testify at her brother's trial, she sank into despair. Years of psychiatric care and hospitalizations followed, but the pain never left her. In 1995, she ended her life by hanging herself at her mother's home in Tahiti. She was just 25. A close friend later reflected, "Marlon was devastated, but he couldn't run from what he'd created. His children had everything except what mattered most: structure, boundaries, and a father's love." The tragedy of Brando's family feels especially haunting because of its cruel irony. On screen, he embodied emotion with breathtaking honesty. Yet in real life, he seemed incapable of expressing it where it mattered most. The man who gave us cinematic truth could not face his own. In one of his few moments of reflection, Brando confessed, "I think I failed as a father. The truth is, I don't think I was much of a father. Actors don't make good fathers. They're gone too much." It was the most human performance of all, spoken not before cameras, but in the quiet aftermath of a broken legacy. Judy Garland. Judy Garland's life was the cruel price of Hollywood perfection. America first fell in love with her as the wide-eyed Dorothy Gale in The Wizard of Oz, a teenager with a voice that made the world believe dreams really could come true somewhere over the rainbow. But behind those sparkling eyes was a child already enslaved by a nightmare, one manufactured and maintained by the very studio that built her fame. According to former MGM staff, Garland's addiction didn't begin with choice, but with orders. They started her on pills when she was just 13, recalled one ex-employee, amphetamines to keep her thin and awake through endless filming, and barbiturates to knock her out at night. She never had a chance. Studio head Louis B. Mayer and his executives were obsessed with preserving her little girl image. Production memos even refer to her cruelly as the little hunchback, and meetings were held on how to suppress her natural growth and weight, chemically, if necessary. By 18, Judy Garland was a star and a full-blown addict. MGM's in-house doctors, loyal not to their patients but to the studio's bottom line, prescribed whatever was needed to keep the cameras rolling. As one production assistant later confessed, they weren't treating people. They were maintaining investments. The cost was devastating. As she aged, Garland's dependence deepened, fueling erratic behavior, breakdowns, and multiple suicide attempts. Her rare comebacks, brilliant, defiant, and heartbreaking, only underscored her fragility. When she died of a barbiturate overdose in 1969 at just 47, the coroner called it accidental. But those who knew her story saw something far darker. Her death was not an accident. It was the final scene in a tragedy scripted decades earlier, when a frightened teenager was handed a handful of pills and told it was the price of stardom. Rock Hudson, the man Hollywood built up as perfection, yet forced to live in silence. To millions of American women in the 1950s and early 60s, he was the ultimate dream, tall, broad-shouldered, impossibly handsome. On screen, he was charm personified, the flawless romantic lead opposite Doris Day and Elizabeth Taylor. But behind the dazzling smile and the glimmer of studio lights, Rock Hudson was living a lie so carefully constructed it nearly consumed him. He was really living two lives, recalled one former publicist. The public Rock, the ladies' man, the heartthrob splashed across fan magazines. And the private Rock, a gentle, funny, deeply kind man who could only be himself behind closed doors. This double life wasn't born from vanity or deceit. It was survival. In an era when being gay could end your career and destroy your life, Hudson's sexuality was a secret his studio would go to great lengths to protect. Universal's powerful agent Henry Wilson arranged photo ops with starlets, fake dates, and even a marriage to his own secretary, Phyllis Gates. A union meant to silence rumors, not build love. "I didn't know it was a setup," Gates later confessed, but everyone else did. For years, Hudson lived under constant fear. Every dinner party, every casual remark, every camera flash carried the risk of exposure. He never got to relax, said one close friend. Even in his own home, he wondered who was watching. And then, the secret he spent decades hiding was revealed in the cruelest way imaginable. In 1985, Rock Hudson became one of the first major Hollywood stars to die of AIDS. The news stunned America. The man who had embodied heterosexual romance was now the face of a crisis the world refused to talk about. Hudson's death shattered illusions. It forced the public to confront both the AIDS epidemic and the suffocating pressure that had driven so many LGBTQ people to hide their truth. He didn't live long enough to enjoy the freedom that later generations would know, but his courage in the face of secrecy and stigma helped change the world. Loretta Young. Loretta Young, Hollywood's picture of virtue, carried a secret that could have destroyed her career and reputation. On screen, she was the embodiment of grace and morality, often portraying women whose purity conquered all adversity. Off-screen, she upheld a strict Catholic faith and was admired for her moral discipline. But behind that flawless facade was a truth so shocking and painful it stayed hidden for decades. In 1935, during the filming of The Call of the Wild, Young and her co-star, the charismatic but married Clark Gable, had a brief affair. When she discovered she was pregnant, she faced an impossible dilemma: expose the scandal and risk her career, or conceal the truth at an unimaginable cost. As film historian Barbara Hall once noted, in the 1930s, an unwed pregnancy wasn't just a scandal. It was a career death sentence, especially for someone like Loretta Young. Determined to protect her image, Young disappeared from public view, claiming illness. She secretly gave birth to a baby girl, Judy, on November 6, 1935. Then, in one of Hollywood's most elaborate deceptions, she arranged through a Catholic orphanage to adopt her own child 19 months later, with help from her mother and sisters. The lie demanded constant vigilance. Young feared the world might notice Judy's striking resemblance to her biological father, especially Gable's distinctive ears. Family sources later revealed that Loretta even had Judy's ears surgically altered at age 7 to hide the similarity. For years, Judy grew up believing she was adopted, calling Loretta Mama, never knowing she was a real mother. The psychological toll of that secret is nearly unimaginable. A woman forced to raise her own child under a lie she could never escape. The truth only emerged in 1966 when Judy, then 31, confronted Loretta after hearing persistent rumors. Only then did Young finally confess that Clark Gable was her father. Even after that revelation, Loretta never publicly acknowledged the truth. Until her death in 2000, she maintained the fiction she had built so carefully. Her story isn't just about scandal. It's about the impossible choices women faced in a time when reputation could mean survival. Loretta Young's deception was both her armor and her burden, a lifelong act of love, fear, and sacrifice hidden beneath Hollywood's golden glow. Mary Astor, the sex diary that shattered Hollywood's illusion. Mary Astor was the picture of sophistication, a woman whose poise, intelligence, and quiet magnetism made her unforgettable in films like The Maltese Falcon, where she played the enigmatic Bridget O'Shaughnessy opposite Humphrey Bogart. On screen, she was refined and untouchable. But off-screen, her private life would soon ignite one of the most explosive scandals of Hollywood's golden age. In 1936, during a bitter custody battle with her ex-husband, Dr. Franklin Thorpe, Astor's carefully crafted image came crashing down. Thorpe threatened to expose her private diary, claiming it contained explicit accounts of her love affairs with several prominent men, many of them married. When excerpts were leaked to the press, America gasped. Written in purple ink, the diary detailed her encounters with shocking candor. Headlines screamed about Mary Astor's purple diary, and for weeks, the story dominated front pages. Entertainment historian Margaret Williams once called it the 1930s equivalent of a celebrity sex tape leak. And she wasn't wrong. The entries reportedly rated her lovers and vividly describe her affair with playwright George S. Kaufman in language so explicit it was deemed pornographic by the standards of the day. The scandal rocked Hollywood to its core. Studios had spent years shaping Astor into the image of elegance and morality, the kind of woman who embodied class itself. Now, that illusion was shattered. Beneath the polished exterior, the world discovered a woman with desire, power, and agency, qualities that were seen as dangerous, even shameful, for women of her era. Though the diary was ultimately ruled inadmissible in court and ordered destroyed, the damage had been done. MGM executives were ready to end her career overnight, but director William Wyler refused to recast her in Dodsworth, insisting she stay in the role. His faith paid off. Astor's remarkable performance helped audiences remember her talent rather than her scandal. Still, the studio placed her on silent probation. One mistake, and she was finished. Mary Astor spent years rebuilding her reputation, working under the shadow of her own notoriety. She later claimed the most explicit entries were fabrications, but by then, the damage was irreversible. Her story became a haunting reminder of Hollywood's double standard, where men's sins were forgiven, but a woman's passion could end her career. Jerry Lewis, America's clown prince or a cold-hearted father. For generations, Jerry Lewis was the nation's jester, the wild-eyed comic genius who turned chaos into laughter. From his slapstick film days to his tearful hosting of the Muscular Dystrophy Association telethons, he seemed like the very embodiment of compassion. He raised more than $2.6 billion for Jerry's Kids, cementing his image as a humanitarian devoted to easing children's suffering. But behind the curtain, a darker truth lingered. To his own family, Lewis wasn't the saint America adored. He was, in his son Gary's words, Jekyll and Hyde. Gary Lewis, frontman of the 1960s pop band Gary Lewis and the Playboys, described a father who could make the world laugh but left his own children in tears. To the public, he was loving and kind, Gary once said. At home, he was cold, distant, sometimes cruel. During his 35-year marriage to singer Patty Palmer, Jerry fathered 6 sons: Gary, Ronald, Scott, Christopher, Anthony, and Joseph. All would later recall a home ruled by strict rules and emotional silence. "We were expected to call him sir," one son said. "He demanded respect, but didn't know how to give it. Cameras adored him. Audiences worshipped him. But his children longed for a father who never seemed to exist." And yet, the cruelest chapter in the Jerry Lewis story belonged to the daughter he never claimed. In the early 1960s, during an affair with fashion model Lynn Dixon, Lewis allegedly fathered a girl named Susan. DNA testing would later support her claim, but Jerry never acknowledged her. While he poured his heart into helping Jerry's kids, Susan Lewis Minet struggled through poverty, watching her famous father raise billions for strangers while ignoring her existence. "The ultimate irony," she once said, "was seeing him cry on TV for children he didn't know, while pretending I didn't exist. A fraction of what he raised could have changed my life." When Lewis died in 2017 at age 91, the final act of rejection came in black and white. His will explicitly cut out all 6 sons from his first marriage. His entire fortune, an estimated $50 million, went to his second wife, Sandy Pinnick, and their adopted daughter, Danielle. He took his grudges to the grave, one associate said. For a man who built his legend on laughter and love for children, Jerry Lewis left behind a haunting question. How could a man who gave so much to strangers show so little to his own blood? Jean Tierney. Jean Tierney was the very definition of grace, a woman whose luminous beauty lit up classics like Laura and The Razor's Edge. With her porcelain features and magnetic screen presence, she seemed untouchable, a goddess of Hollywood's golden age. But behind that flawless face was a heartbreak so devastating, so cruelly random, that it would shatter her mind and haunt her forever. It began with what seemed like an innocent act, a brief encounter with an adoring fan. Yet that single moment set off a chain of tragedy that destroyed Jean's peace, her career, and ultimately her spirit. In 1943, Tierney was glowing with joy, expecting her first child. Despite warnings about a rubella outbreak, she appeared at the Hollywood canteen to greet servicemen. Among the crowd that night was a woman desperate to meet her idol. Jean smiled, shook hands, and thought little of it. Months later, her daughter, Daria, was born blind, deaf, and severely disabled, the result of congenital rubella syndrome. Doctors told her she must have contracted the virus during pregnancy, but Jean couldn't remember being sick. Years later, at another event, the horrifying truth came out. A woman approached her and proudly said, "You won't remember me, but I met you at the Hollywood canteen. I had rubella at the time, but I just had to see you." Jean froze. That woman, that moment, had unknowingly destroyed her daughter's life. A friend later said Jean felt as if she'd been punched in the heart. She turned away, silent, numb, her entire world collapsing in an instant. From that day, Jean was never the same. The guilt and grief consumed her. She suffered deep depression, was eventually diagnosed with bipolar disorder, and endured brutal electroshock treatments that erased parts of her memory. The woman once hailed as Hollywood's most beautiful star became a shadow of herself. Fragile, haunted, yet still clinging to dignity. Daria lived her life in a special care facility, rarely spoken of publicly. Jean's silence was not coldness, it was pain. The cruelest part of Jean's story, one historian said, is how random it was. If that fan had just stayed home, Daria would have been healthy, and Jean's life might have been completely different. One selfish choice, one fleeting moment of admiration, and everything changed. Ben Stiller, Hollywood's most secretly hated comedian. On screen, Ben Stiller has mastered the art of awkward charm, the neurotic underdog stumbling through chaos, winning laughs, and somehow stealing hearts. From Meet the Parents to Zoolander, he built an empire out of self-deprecating humor and everyman vulnerability, grossing billions worldwide. But behind the laughter, insiders paint a very different picture, one far removed from the lovable misfit audiences adore. According to numerous industry sources, the real Ben Stiller is a far cry from his on-screen persona. Ben's nice guy act ends the moment the cameras stop rolling, revealed one production coordinator who worked on multiple sets. There's a reason some crew members quietly call him the Antichrist. They describe a man whose perfectionism often crosses into cruelty, a director-actor hybrid with impossible standards and an explosive temper. Stories from the set describe an atmosphere thick with tension, where even seasoned professionals tread carefully, terrified of triggering one of Stiller's infamous outbursts. "You can't relax around him," said one veteran camera operator. "He can go from dead silence to full-blown rage in seconds. Everyone walks on eggshells." Assistants recall being berated for trivial mistakes, a wrong coffee order, a scheduling mix-up beyond their control. Some say Stiller wouldn't even acknowledge their existence, refusing to learn their names despite working with them for months. "He walked past me every day for 14 weeks and never said a word," one former assistant recalled. "The only time he spoke to me was to scream because I came back 5 minutes late from lunch." What makes these claims so striking is how sharply they contrast with his public image. In interviews, Stiller comes across as humble, reflective, and collaborative, a man who appreciates his team and remains grateful for his success. Yet, according to those behind the camera, that image is as carefully scripted as any role he's ever played. Even some of his co-stars have hinted, quietly, at the same troubling pattern. "The laughs stop the second the cameras do," confessed one supporting actor from a hit Stiller comedy. "Between takes, it's like the temperature drops 20 degrees. He's not joking, not chatting. He's watching, judging, always calculating." In Hollywood, where charm is currency, Ben Stiller's brand has always been about relatability. But if the whispers are true, the man behind the nervous smile isn't the quirky underdog. He's the boss no one dares to cross. Chevy Chase. Chevy Chase, the man who once defined American comedy, now remembered as its most hated figure. In the 1970s, Chase was untouchable, the breakout star of Saturday Night Live, whose razor-sharp wit and slapstick timing turned him into Hollywood gold. From Caddyshack to Fletch to National Lampoon's Vacation, his charm, sarcasm, and confident swagger made him a household name. But behind that grin and perfectly timed punchline was a man whose ego and cruelty would eventually destroy everything he built. Those who worked with him describe a pattern: arrogance, insults, and an almost compulsive need to humiliate others. In my 40 years in entertainment, I've never met anyone who burned as many bridges as Chevy, confessed one veteran SNL writer. He's the only performer I know who's universally disliked by cast, directors, and even the crew. The trouble started early. During his brief time on SNL, Chase's self-importance reportedly caused constant tension with fellow cast members. When he left for Hollywood fame, few were sad to see him go. But every time he returned to host, the atmosphere soured again. Especially in 1985, when he proposed a cruel sketch mocking an openly gay cast member, Terry Sweeney, suggesting they weigh him weekly to check for AIDS. The writers were horrified. It wasn't edgy humor, it was vicious. As his film career declined through the 90s and 2000s, so did his behavior. Tales of racist remarks, outbursts, and physical altercations followed him from set to set. When he joined Community in 2009, a new generation saw the same toxic pattern play out in real time. Creator Dan Harmon and cast members clashed with Chase repeatedly, and actor Donald Glover later revealed that Chevy told him, "People think you're funnier because you're black." Former co-stars described him as a man trapped in bitterness, incapable of self-awareness. One director summed it up best: "It's like Chevy never grew past being a 13-year-old bully. He tears people down to feel powerful, then wonders why he's alone." Even SNL creator Lorne Michaels, who rarely speaks ill of talent, once admitted he made comedy feel dangerous, but not in a good way. By the time Netflix's Saturday Night retrospective aired in 2018, Chase's isolation was impossible to ignore. While his former castmates shared laughter and nostalgia, Chevy appeared defensive and detached, a man haunted by the bridges he'd burned. Once a king of comedy, now a cautionary tale of what happens when talent turns toxic.